The massive python's coils tightened around Maya's pregnant body, crushing the life from her and her unborn kittens as she struggled desperately against the serpent's deadly embrace. Wildlife rescuers Elena and Jessica stood frozen in horror at the brutal scene unfolding before them, tears streaming down their faces as they realized they had seconds, not minutes, to save the mother bobcat and her precious cargo. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Deep in the heart of Florida's Everglades, where emerald waters meet dense marshlands, a deadly drama was unfolding beneath the canopy of cypress trees. The morning light filtered through the leaves, casting dappled shadows across the forest floor, where Maya, a female bobcat, moved with practiced stealth. Her normally agile body was heavier now, carrying precious cargo, 4 unborn kittens that would arrive in just a few weeks. Life had taught her caution, but hunger drove her forward. The small rodents she typically hunted were becoming scarce, and feeding for 5 meant taking greater risks. She paused, her keen ears swiveling at the sound of movement in the underbrush ahead. Potential prey. Her golden eyes narrowed as she calculated the distance, muscles tensing in preparation. What she didn't notice was the silent predator watching her from above. The Burmese python, 16 feet of powerful muscle, had been introduced to these wetlands decades ago, an exotic pet released into an ecosystem unprepared for such an apex predator. It had thrived, decimating local wildlife populations and growing to monstrous proportions. Now, coiled around a low-hanging branch, its primitive brain registered the bobcat's heat signature as it slipped silently closer to the ground. Maya pounced on the marsh rabbit, her claws extended, only to miss as the frightened creature darted away. In that moment of vulnerability, the python struck. Its massive body unfurled like a living whip, catching Maya off guard. She hissed and swiped, her sharp claws drawing blood, but the snake's powerful coils were already wrapping around her neck and chest. 10 miles away, at the Everglades Wildlife Rescue Center, Dr. Elena Vasquez was reviewing the day's schedule with her assistant Jessica Chen. At 34, Elena had dedicated the past decade to protecting the delicate balance of the Everglades ecosystem. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, her olive skin tanned from countless hours in the field. "We've got 2 injured herons coming in later, and a follow-up on the panther cub we treated last week," Jessica said, scrolling through their digital calendar. At 28, she was newer to wildlife conservation, but made up for it with passion and an uncanny ability to connect with the animals in their care. Elena nodded, reaching for her coffee mug. "And the tracking data from our tagged bobcats?" "That's actually strange," Jessica replied, her brow furrowing as she pulled up a map on her tablet. "Maya's signal has been stationary for almost 2 hours. That's unusual for this time of day." Elena's expression turned serious. Maya was special, one of the first bobcats they'd tagged in their study of declining native predator populations. More importantly, their last examination had revealed she was pregnant. "Let me see," Elena said, taking the tablet. The blinking dot showed Maya's location deep in the cypress swamp, an area they knew was increasingly being invaded by pythons. "I don't like this. She should be moving." "You think something's wrong?" "I hope not, but we should check." Elena was already reaching for her field kit. "We can take the airboat. If she's just resting, we'll leave her be, but..." Jessica understood the unspoken concern. The Burmese python invasion had devastated the Everglades ecosystem, with native species unprepared for these massive constrictors. If Maya had encountered one, especially in her pregnant state. 20 minutes later, they were skimming across the shallow waters of the Everglades, the airboat's fan propelling them through channels of sawgrass and around cypress knees that jutted from the water like wooden stalagmites. The humidity pressed against their skin as they navigated deeper into the wilderness, following the signal from Maya's collar. "There." Jessica pointed to a clearing ahead where the trees thinned. Elena cut the engine, letting the boat glide silently forward. As they approached, the scene that greeted them turned their blood cold. Maya was pinned against a fallen log, her body partially wrapped in the massive coils of a Burmese python. The snake had managed to loop its body around her neck and torso, but Maya had somehow wedged herself against the log, preventing the python from delivering its killing squeeze. The standoff might have been going on for hours, the bobcat's strength clearly fading, her golden eyes glazed with exhaustion. "Oh my God," Jessica whispered, her hand covering her mouth in horror. "She's still alive." Elena was already reaching for their rescue equipment, a specialized snake hook, protective gloves, and a large transport container. "We need to move quickly. She can't hold out much longer." The snake seemed to sense their approach, its head rising slightly, tongue flicking to taste the air. Maya's eyes found them, and something like recognition flickered in her gaze. They had handled her before during tagging operations, a familiarity that might now save her life. "The snake's at least 16 feet, Elena assessed, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Too big to handle safely, but we don't have a choice." Jessica nodded, pulling on thick protective gloves. "What's the plan?" "I'll try to secure the head with the snake hook. You'll need to unwrap the coils, starting from the top. Be careful, even partially constricted, Maya might lash out from fear." They moved in perfect sync, years of working together evident in their wordless coordination. Elena approached from the front, snake hook extended, while Jessica circled to the side, searching for the best angle to begin unwrapping the massive snake. "Easy now," Elena murmured, though whether she was speaking to the animals or to herself wasn't clear. The python's head tracked her movement, its primitive brain calculating this new threat. With practiced precision, Elena managed to pin the snake's head with the hook, applying just enough pressure to control without injuring. "Now, Jessica moved in, grasping the top coil with her gloved hands. The python's muscles were like steel cables, resisting her efforts to loosen their grip. Maya's breathing was labored, her pregnant belly rising and falling in shallow pants. "It's too tight," Jessica grunted, struggling against the snake's incredible strength. "Try to wedge your fingers under the coil," Elena instructed, maintaining her grip on the hook. "We just need to create enough space for her to breathe properly." Sweat beaded on Jessica's forehead as she fought against the constrictor. The python responded by tightening further, causing Maya to emit a weak sound somewhere between a growl and a whimper. "Elena, she's fading." The desperation in Jessica's voice matched the sinking feeling in Elena's stomach. They were losing her, losing Maya and her unborn kittens. Years of conservation work, of trying to protect the native species against this invasive predator, seemed to crystallize in this moment. Tears of frustration welled in Jessica's eyes as she continued to struggle with the coils. The python was simply too strong, its evolutionary perfection as a predator, making it nearly impossible to save its victim once ensnared. Elena made a split-second decision. Maintaining her grip on the snake hook with one hand, she reached for the emergency kit with the other and extracted a syringe. "Hold steady," she called to Jessica. "I'm going to sedate the snake." It was risky. The dosage for a python this size was difficult to calculate in the field, and the effect wouldn't be immediate, but they were out of options. With practiced efficiency, Elena administered the injection into the muscular body of the python. Now it was a race against time, waiting for the sedative to take effect while Maya's life hung in the balance. "Talk to her," Elena instructed Jessica. "Keep her focused, conscious." Jessica leaned close to the bobcat's head, her voice soft and encouraging. "Stay with us, Maya. Think of your babies, just a little longer." Maya's eyes, once sharp and alert, were beginning to dull. The magnificent creature that had survived countless challenges in the wild was slipping away before their eyes. Jessica couldn't stop the tears that spilled down her cheeks now, the emotion of the moment overwhelming her professional distance. "Please," she whispered to Maya, to the universe, to whatever might be listening. "Please hold on." The seconds crawled by with excruciating slowness. Elena kept her grip firm on the snake hook, her eyes darting between the python's head and its powerful body. Jessica continued her gentle murmuring to Maya, one hand still trying to loosen the constrictor's deadly embrace while the other stroked the bobcat's fur, attempting to keep her conscious. "The sedative should start working soon," Elena said, her voice tight with strain. "Just a little longer." As if responding to her words, the python's muscles seemed to relax slightly, the steely tension in its coils beginning to ebb. It wasn't much, just a fraction of release, but it was enough. Jessica immediately took advantage, wedging her fingers deeper between the snake's body and Maya's neck. "I've got some space," she reported, excitement bleeding into her voice. "She's getting more air." Elena allowed herself a small nod of encouragement, careful not to lose focus on controlling the python's head. "Good. See if you can get more of the coil unwrapped now." Working methodically, Jessica managed to loosen the upper coil around Maya's neck. The bobcat drew a deeper breath, her chest expanding more fully. Hope flickered in her golden eyes, a silent connection with the humans who were fighting to save her life. "That's it, Maya," Jessica encouraged. "Stay with us." The python's movements became increasingly sluggish as the sedative took greater effect. With each passing minute, Jessica made progress unwinding the massive snake from Maya's body. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she pulled away the last coil. "She's free," Jessica breathed, tears of relief streaming down her face. Maya remained still, exhausted from her ordeal, but her breathing was stronger now. Elena moved quickly, maintaining control of the python with one hand while retrieving a specialized transport bag for the snake with the other. "We need to move fast," she instructed. "The sedative won't last long. Help me get this python secured." Together, they maneuvered the massive reptile into the reinforced bag, cinching it closed with practiced efficiency. Only then did Elena allow herself to turn her full attention to Maya. "How is she?" she asked, kneeling beside the bobcat. Jessica was already conducting a preliminary examination, her trained hands gently probing for injuries. "Breathing is stabilizing. Some lacerations from the scales and probably bruising we can't see, but..." She paused, placing her stethoscope against Maya's rounded belly. A smile broke across her tear-stained face. "I hear fetal heartbeats, strong ones." Elena exhaled sharply, only now realizing she'd been holding her breath. "Let's get her back to the center." With gentle movements, they transferred Maya to a padded transport crate. The bobcat offered no resistance, her usual wild temperament subdued by exhaustion and perhaps some level of understanding that these humans meant her no harm. As they loaded both animals onto the airboat, Elena caught Jessica staring at the python bag with an expression that mingled fear and anger. "It's not the snake's fault," Elena said softly, reading her assistant's thoughts. "They don't belong here, but they're just doing what they evolved to do." Jessica nodded reluctantly. "I know, it's just seeing Maya like that." She trailed off, unable to find the words. "I understand." Elena placed a hand on her shoulder. "But we're addressing the symptom, not the cause. Removing pythons one by one won't solve the problem." The airboat engine roared to life, drowning further conversation as they sped back across the Everglades toward the rescue center. The golden afternoon light cast long shadows across the sawgrass, painting the landscape in hues of amber and bronze. Despite the beauty surrounding them, both women remained focused on their precious cargo, a testament to the delicate balance of life and death in this ancient ecosystem. Back at the center, a flurry of activity greeted their return. Word had spread of their emergency mission, and the staff had prepared the surgical suite just in case. Dr. Marcus Adler, the center's veterinarian, met them at the dock. At 52, Marcus had the steady hands of a surgeon and the weathered face of a man who'd spent decades in the field. "How bad?" he asked, helping them unload Maya's crate. "Python constriction," Elena explained tersely. "She's pregnant, approximately 3 to 4 weeks from term. Breathing is stable, but we need to check for internal injuries." Marcus nodded, his expression grave. "Let's get her inside." They moved Maya to the examination table where Marcus began a thorough assessment. Jessica stayed by the Bobcat's head, monitoring her vitals and providing reassurance with her presence. Elena stepped back, allowing the veterinarian room to work, and turned her attention to the python. 2 of their staff handlers were already transferring the massive snake to a secure holding facility. Elena followed them, wanting to ensure proper protocols were followed. The python was beginning to stir as the sedative wore off, its powerful body shifting within the containment bag. 16 feet at least, remarked Tim, one of the handlers, probably female. Elena nodded. "We'll microchip her and record the data for the python removal program, then release her to the state authorities." Tim secured the containment unit and looked at Elena with raised eyebrows. "You know they'll euthanize her, right? That's standard protocol for pythons over a certain size." "I know." Elena's voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her conflicted feelings. "But that's the policy we're working under until something better comes along." The uncomfortable truth hung between them. The python problem in the Everglades had reached crisis proportions, with estimates suggesting tens of thousands of these invasive predators now roam the wetlands. Released decades ago by irresponsible pet owners or escaped from breeding facilities during hurricanes, Burmese pythons had found paradise in the warm, prey-rich environment of South Florida. With no natural predators and an abundance of vulnerable native species, they had thrived beyond all expectations. The ecological damage was catastrophic. Studies showed population declines of up to 99% for some native mammals in python-infested areas. Rabbits, raccoons, possums, and even deer were disappearing at alarming rates. And predators like bobcats, already struggling with habitat loss, faced direct competition from these efficient hunters. Elena returned to the medical suite, where Marcus was completing his examination of Maya. The tension in her shoulders eased slightly when she saw the bobcat's steady breathing and alert eyes. "What's the verdict?" she asked. "Remarkably lucky," Marcus replied, removing his gloves. "No broken bones, no signs of internal bleeding. Some soft tissue damage from the constriction, but nothing that won't heal. And the kittens appear unharmed." Jessica smiled, gently stroking Maya's head. The bobcat allowed the touch, too exhausted to maintain her usual wariness. "She's a fighter. She'll need to stay here for at least a week," Marcus continued. "We need to monitor for delayed complications from the constriction injury, especially given her pregnancy." Elena nodded, already mentally reorganizing their schedule to accommodate Maya's care. "We'll set up the isolation recovery pen. It's quiet there, away from the main treatment areas." As they transferred Maya to the recovery area, Elena found herself reflecting on the day's events. 1 life saved, 5, counting the unborn kittens, against the backdrop of an environmental catastrophe that claimed countless others. It was easy to feel overwhelmed by the scale of the problem, to question whether their efforts made any meaningful difference, yet looking at Maya, now resting on soft bedding in the recovery pen, Elena felt a renewed sense of purpose. Each life mattered. Each small victory counted. And perhaps most importantly, each rescue brought public attention to the larger issues threatening the Everglades ecosystem. "I'll take the first monitoring shift," Jessica volunteered, setting up a chair beside Maya's pen. Elena smiled gratefully. Thanks. I need to call the park service and file the python capture report. Then I'll relieve you. As she turned to leave, Jessica called after her softly. Elena, we did good today, right? Elena looked back at Maya, now sleeping peacefully, her swollen belly rising and falling with each breath. Within that belly, new life continued to develop, future bobcats who would help maintain the delicate balance of this threatened ecosystem. Yes, she answered, conviction strengthening her voice. We did good today. Night fell over the Everglades Wildlife Rescue Center, the chorus of frogs and insects providing a natural soundtrack to the darkness. Inside the isolation recovery area, the soft glow of monitoring equipment cast shadows across Maya's sleeping form. Jessica sat beside the pen, clipboard in hand, recording vital signs every 30 minutes as instructed. The center was quiet at this hour. Most staff had gone home, leaving only the night crew to tend to their various charges. Jessica didn't mind the solitude. It gave her time to process the day's events, to come to terms with how close they'd come to losing Maya and her unborn kittens. She was scrolling through the photos she'd taken during the rescue, documentation for their records, when Elena returned, carrying 2 steaming mugs. Thought you could use this, she said, handing one to Jessica. How's our patient? Jessica accepted the coffee gratefully. Stable. Her breathing's normal, and she took a little water about an hour ago. No interest in food yet, but Marcus said that's to be expected. Elena nodded, pulling up a second chair. For a moment they sat in companionable silence, both watching the rise and fall of Maya's chest. I uploaded the incident report and some photos to our social media, Elena said finally. The public response has been intense. Intense good or intense bad? Both. Elena sipped her coffee. We've received over 50,000 views already. Hundreds of comments and donations are pouring in. But there's also been backlash. People upset that we're wasting resources on a single bobcat when there are so many pythons to remove. Jessica frowned. People just don't understand the bigger picture. Some do, some don't. The important thing is we've got people talking about the python problem. That was always part of our mission, education and awareness. A soft sound from Maya's pen drew their attention. The bobcat had shifted position, her eyes half open as she surveyed her surroundings. Jessica leaned closer, making sure to maintain a safe distance. Even an injured bobcat could be dangerous if frightened. Hey there, Maya, she said softly. You're safe now. Maya's golden eyes fixed on Jessica, and for a heartbeat there seemed to be recognition there, or perhaps it was merely the anthropomorphizing that Elena was always cautioning against. Either way, the moment passed quickly as Maya lowered her head back to the bedding, apparently satisfied that no immediate threat existed. She'll need to eat soon, Elena observed. Her body's fighting to recover and sustain those kittens. I'll try offering some raw chicken in the morning. Small pieces, easy to digest. Elena nodded approval, then checked her watch. You should get some rest. I'll take over monitoring for the night. I'm fine, Jessica protested, though the dark circles under her eyes told a different story. That wasn't a suggestion, Elena said firmly, though her smile softened the words. You need sleep. Tomorrow's going to be busy. We've got the news crew from Channel 7 coming to interview us about the rescue. Jessica's eyebrows shot up. News crew? Already? The power of social media. The video clip I posted has gone viral. People love a good wildlife rescue story, especially when it involves a pregnant mother. Elena's expression turned thoughtful. It's an opportunity to educate the public about the python problem and our conservation efforts. We need to make the most of it. Reluctantly, Jessica agreed to go home and rest. As she gathered her things, she cast one last glance at Maya. She's going to be okay, right? Elena's gaze was steady. We're doing everything we can. The rest is up to her. After Jessica left, Elena settled in for the night watch. She reviewed Maya's charts, made notes on her observations, and occasionally checked her phone for updates on the public response to their rescue video. The comments ranged from heartwarming support to critical questions about resource allocation, with a fair number asking about the fate of the python. That particular question weighed heavily on Elena's mind. As a conservation biologist, she understood the ecological necessity of removing invasive species. The python they'd captured would likely be euthanized, its body used for scientific research. It was standard protocol, backed by sound environmental management principles. Yet she couldn't help but remember the magnificent power of the creature, its perfect evolutionary design. The python was simply doing what nature had programmed it to do: survive, hunt, reproduce. It wasn't the snake's fault that human irresponsibility had introduced it to an ecosystem where it had no natural predators. Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft chime from her phone, a text message from Dr. Harrington, the center's director. Saw the rescue video. Impressive work. Board wants full presentation at emergency meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. Potential for expanded funding for Python management program. Elena sighed, both pleased and exhausted at the prospect. More funding would certainly help their efforts, but navigating the politics of conservation always drained her. The board members meant well, but few truly understood the day-to-day realities of wildlife management. Morning arrived with golden light streaming through the high windows of the recovery area. Elena, who had dozed off in her chair sometime around dawn, was awakened by the sound of movement from Maya's pen. The Bobcat was awake, attempting to sit up, her movements cautious but determined. "Well, good morning to you too," Elena said, quickly checking the monitoring equipment. Maya's vitals were strong, stronger than expected after such an ordeal. "You're quite the fighter, aren't you?" Maya regarded her with that same inscrutable gaze, neither friendly nor hostile, merely assessing. Elena respected that wild wariness, the ancient wisdom that kept predators like Maya alive in a world increasingly dominated by humans. Jessica arrived early, carrying a container of fresh raw chicken pieces. "How was the night?" she asked, looking refreshed after a few hours of sleep. "Uneventful, which is exactly what we wanted," Elena replied, stretching to work out the kinks in her back from sleeping in the chair. "She's alert this morning, and her vitals are stable." Together they observed as Maya cautiously approached the small pieces of chicken Jessica had placed in her feeding dish. The Bobcat sniffed them thoroughly before taking a small bite, then another, her appetite apparently returning. "That's a good sign," Jessica said, unable to keep the relief from her voice. Before Elena could respond, the door to the recovery area opened, and Marcus entered, accompanied by a tall man in an expensive suit that looked distinctly out of place in the clinical setting of the Wildlife Center. "Morning, ladies," Marcus greeted them. "Hope I'm not interrupting. This is Congressman Richard Hayes. He's on the Environmental Appropriations Committee and wanted to see our operation firsthand after hearing about yesterday's rescue." Elena suppressed a groan. Political visits were part of the job, necessary for funding and support, but they always felt like performances, taking valuable time away from actual conservation work. "Congressman," she acknowledged with a professional nod, "welcome to the Everglades Wildlife Rescue Center." Hayes approached the recovery pen, peering at Maya with obvious interest. "So this is the famous Bobcat I've been hearing about. Quite a story. Pregnant mother saved from a python. Makes for compelling headlines." There was something calculated in his interest that immediately put Elena on guard. "Maya represents just one example of the impact invasive pythons are having on our native wildlife," she said carefully. We're seeing population declines across multiple species. Yes, the python problem. Hayes waved a dismissive hand. That's actually why I'm here. My committee is considering a significant funding package for invasive species management in the Everglades. Your rescue has created quite the media opportunity to announce it. Jessica exchanged a quick glance with Elena, both recognizing the political theater being set up. Funding was desperately needed, but being used as a photo opportunity felt uncomfortably exploitative. We'd be happy to discuss the scientific basis for various management approaches, Elena offered diplomatically. Our team has extensive data on python impacts and removal strategies. Hayes smiled, but the expression didn't reach his eyes. Certainly. But first, I was hoping to get a photograph with the rescued Bobcat. Something for the press release, you understand. Elena felt her professional smile freeze in place. I'm afraid that won't be possible, Congressman. Maya is a wild animal recovering from a traumatic injury. Stress from camera flashes and additional human presence could endanger both her and her unborn kittens. The politician's smile faltered slightly. Surely an exception could be made. This funding could mean millions for your center. Marcus stepped forward, his veteran presence filling the sudden tension in the room. Congressman, I can assure you our protocols are based on decades of wildlife rehabilitation experience. Perhaps I can show you our python research facility instead. We're doing groundbreaking work on tracking and removal methods. Hayes hesitated, clearly weighing the political calculus of pushing the issue versus accepting the alternative. Finally, he nodded with practiced graciousness. Of course, the welfare of the animals must come first. I'd be happy to see your research facility. As Marcus led the politician away, Jessica released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. That was tense. Welcome to conservation politics, Elena replied, rubbing her temples. The funding is crucial, but not at Maya's expense. Do you think he'll hold it against us? Probably, but Marcus knows how to handle politicians. He'll give Hayes something else to put in his press release. Elena checked her watch. The news crew will be here in an hour. Let's check Maya's vitals one more time, then get cleaned up. Jessica nodded, moving to prepare fresh water for their patient. As she worked, she observed Maya watching her movements with increasing alertness, a good sign for her recovery. The bobcat's natural wariness seemed to be returning, another positive indicator. Her pupils are responding normally, Elena noted, shining a small penlight near Maya's face from a safe distance. No signs of neurological damage from oxygen deprivation. And her breathing is steady, Jessica added. The swelling around her neck has gone down significantly overnight. They completed their assessment, both pleased with Maya's progress. As they prepared to leave for their interviews, Elena paused at the door, looking back at the bobcat with a mixture of professional satisfaction and personal connection. We'll be back soon, she said softly, though whether she was informing Maya or reassuring herself wasn't entirely clear. The media presence outside the center had grown since morning. What had started as a single local news crew had expanded to include representatives from several national outlets, all drawn by the compelling story of the pregnant bobcat's rescue from a python's deadly grip. Elena and Jessica emerged from the building to find Dr. Harrington already handling preliminary questions. At 64, Charlotte Harrington was a towering figure in wildlife conservation, her silver hair and commanding presence lending authority to every statement she made. "Ah, here they are now," Dr. Harrington announced, gesturing toward Elena and Jessica. "The heroes of the hour." Elena suppressed a wince at the characterization. "We were just doing our jobs," she said as the cameras swung toward them. "The real story here is the impact of invasive pythons on our native wildlife. For the next 45 minutes, they fielded questions about the rescue, Maya's condition, and the broader ecological crisis unfolding in the Everglades. Elena steered the conversation toward the science whenever possible, while Jessica provided the more emotional elements that made for compelling television. "And what about the python?" asked a reporter from a national network. "What happens to it now?" The question Elena had been dreading. She chose her words carefully, aware of the cameras recording her every expression. "The python has been turned over to the state's python elimination program," she explained. "It will contribute to our understanding of these invasive predators and help develop more effective management strategies. So it will be euthanized," the reporter pressed. "That is the standard protocol for captured pythons over a certain size, yes." Elena maintained her professional demeanor, though Jessica could see the subtle tension in her jaw. "We have to remember that while individual animals deserve compassion, our primary responsibility is to the ecosystem as a whole. Burmese pythons have decimated native mammal populations by up to 99% in some areas of the Everglades." Dr. Harrington stepped in, sensing Elena's discomfort. "Our center follows state guidelines on invasive species management. Now, if you'll excuse us, we have patients requiring our attention." As they walked back toward the building away from the cameras, Jessica murmured, "You handled that well." Elena shook her head slightly. "I hate the politics of it all. Every time I talk about euthanizing pythons, I get hate mail from reptile enthusiasts who don't understand the ecological damage these animals are causing. And if you didn't talk about controlling the python population, you'd get hate mail from bird watchers and mammal conservationists," Jessica pointed out. "You can't win." "Conservation isn't about winning," Elena replied wearily. "It's about making the least bad choices in impossible situations." When they returned to the recovery area, they found Marcus already there, examining Maya. His expression was unreadable as he made notes on her chart. "How did it go with Hayes?" Elena asked. "About as expected. He was more interested in photo opportunities than actual conservation strategies." Marcus set down his clipboard. "But he seemed impressed by our python research, especially when I showed him the size comparison charts. I think the funding is still on the table." "And Maya, how's she doing?" Marcus's expression softened. "Actually, I was just about to find you. There's been a development." Elena felt her stomach tighten. "What kind of development?" "She's showing early signs of labor." Jessica gasped. "But it's too soon. You said she was still weeks away from term." "I did, and she should be." Marcus gestured toward Maya, who had indeed taken on a restless quality, shifting positions frequently and showing signs of discomfort. "But trauma can trigger premature labor in many mammals. The stress of the attack, the constriction injury, her body may have decided that delivering now is safer than continuing the pregnancy." Elena moved closer to the pen, her experienced eyes noting the subtle changes in Maya's behavior. "What are our options?" "Limited," Marcus admitted. "We can try to administer tocolytics to stop the labor, but that carries its own risks, or we monitor closely and prepare to assist with the birth if necessary." "And the kitten's chances if born this early?" Marcus hesitated. "Bobcat gestation is typically 60 to 70 days. Based on her physical development, I'd estimate she's at day 50, maybe 52. That puts the kittens at about 80% developed." "So they have a chance," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "A chance, yes, but they'll need intensive care." Marcus turned to Elena. "It's your call. You're the project lead on the Bobcat conservation program." Elena felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Intervention meant further stress for Maya, potentially endangering her life. Non-intervention might mean losing the kittens, valuable additions to the declining bobcat population. There were no easy answers, no clearly correct path. Let's start with minimal intervention, she decided finally. Create a quieter, darker environment. Monitor her closely. Prepare the neonatal equipment just in case, but let's see if her labor progresses or if it's a false alarm. Marcus nodded, already moving to adjust the lighting in the recovery area. Jessica began gathering the necessary monitoring equipment. Her movements quick but controlled, professional training overriding emotional response. For the next several hours, they maintained a quiet vigil. Maya continued to show signs of discomfort, occasionally pacing or pawing at the bedding in her enclosure. By late afternoon, however, the contractions seemed to have subsided somewhat, giving them cautious hope that the premature labor might have been temporarily averted. Her vitals are stable, Jessica reported, checking the remote monitoring system they'd set up to minimize disturbance. Fetal heartbeats still strong. Elena nodded, relief washing through her. Let's continue the current approach. Someone should stay with her overnight, but I think the immediate crisis may have passed. As the day shifted toward evening, Congressman Hayes returned, this time accompanied by several aides and a photographer. Elena intercepted them before they could enter the recovery area. I'm sorry, Congressman, but we're dealing with a medical situation with the Bobcat. No visitors at this time. Hayes frowned. We've arranged a press conference to announce the funding package. Having the rescue team present would make a powerful statement. Elena felt a surge of frustration but kept her voice level. I understand the importance of the announcement, Congressman, but my primary responsibility is to the animals in our care. Maya is experiencing a medical emergency that could threaten both her life and the lives of her unborn kittens. Hayes's expression hardened slightly. Dr. Vasquez, perhaps I haven't made myself clear. This funding package represents over $5 million for python management and native species conservation. Your presence would demonstrate the real-world impact of these funds. Before Elena could respond, Dr. Harrington appeared in the hallway, her timing impeccable as always. Congressman Hayes, she greeted, extending her hand. I understand you're organizing a press conference about the funding initiative. The Everglades Wildlife Rescue Center would be delighted to have representation there. She glanced at Elena. However, Dr. Vasquez is our lead Bobcat specialist, and her expertise is needed here for a critical case. She turned to Jessica. Ms. Chen, as our community outreach coordinator, perhaps you could attend in Elena's place. You were, after all, directly involved in the rescue. Jessica blinked in surprise. Community outreach was only a small part of her role, but quickly recovered. Of course, Dr. Harrington, I'd be happy to represent the center. Hayes looked like he wanted to object, but Dr. Harrington continued smoothly. Now, if you'll follow me, I can show you our visitor center where we've set up some compelling visual displays about the python problem. Perfect backdrop for your announcement. With practiced diplomacy, she guided Hayes and his entourage away from the recovery area, leaving Elena and Jessica alone. Community outreach coordinator, Jessica whispered once they were out of earshot. Elena gave her a tired smile. Charlotte's a master at handling difficult situations. She just promoted you on the spot to solve a problem. So I have to go to this press conference? Looks like it. But it's important, Jess. The funding really is crucial for our work. Elena squeezed her assistant's shoulder. Besides, you'll do great. You're passionate and knowledgeable, exactly what we need representing us. Jessica nodded, though anxiety flickered across her features. What about Maya? I'll stay with her. If anything changes, I'll call you immediately. After Jessica left to prepare for the press conference, Elena returned to Maya's enclosure. The Bobcat had settled somewhat, curled in a corner of the pen, her golden eyes half closed but watchful. Elena pulled up a chair and sat quietly, maintaining enough distance to avoid stressing her patient while staying close enough to observe any changes. "Just you and me now, Maya," she said softly. "Let's see if we can keep those babies cooking a little longer, shall we?" As the afternoon wore on, Elena used the time to catch up on reports and data analysis on her tablet, occasionally glancing up to check on Maya. The Bobcat's contractions seemed to have subsided further, though she remained restless, changing positions frequently. It was during one of these position changes that Elena noticed something concerning: a small amount of bloody discharge on the bedding. Immediately, she sent a text to Marcus. "Spotting observed. Need you in recovery room ASAP." Within minutes, the veterinarian arrived, his face grave as Elena showed him the discharge. He conducted a careful visual examination, keeping a safe distance but using a specialized scope to get a better view. "It's not extensive bleeding, which is good," he said finally, "but combined with the contractions, it suggests her body is preparing for labor. I think we need to prepare for the possibility that these kittens are coming, ready or not." Elena felt her heart sink. "What can we do to improve their chances?" "We'll set up the neonatal incubators and have oxygen support ready. If we need to intervene, we will. But my hope is that Maya can deliver naturally. Bobcats are remarkably resilient, and so are their young." They worked quietly, efficiently, setting up the emergency equipment while trying not to disturb Maya further. Elena's mind raced with contingency plans, calculating survival probabilities based on gestational age, considering what specialized care premature bobcat kittens would require. "I should probably warn you," Marcus said as they finished their preparations, "that if she does give birth, we'll be facing some difficult decisions. Premature kittens may need hand-rearing, which means they likely couldn't be returned to the wild." Elena had already reached the same conclusion, but hearing it spoken aloud made the reality more stark. Non-releasable bobcats, not what our conservation program was aiming for. "No," Marcus agreed, "but they could still serve an important purpose: education, research, perhaps even breeding in captivity if they're healthy enough." The conversation was interrupted by a soft but distinctive sound from Maya, a low moan that made both humans turn toward her enclosure. The bobcat was stretching her body out, paws kneading the bedding, clear signs that labor was intensifying. "It's happening," Elena said, reaching for her phone to update Jessica. The text was brief. "Labor progressing. Standing by with Marcus." At the press conference across town, Jessica stood nervously at the edge of the makeshift stage as Congressman Hayes delivered his remarks. The event had been hastily organized in a local park, with the Everglades as a backdrop. News crews from several stations had set up cameras, and a small crowd of environmental activists, local politicians, and curious citizens had gathered. Which is why I'm proud to announce today a $5 million funding package dedicated to combating the invasive python threat and protecting our precious native wildlife, Hayes was saying. This initiative will support expanded removal efforts, advanced tracking technology, and crucial research into python's impact on the ecosystem. Jessica's phone vibrated with Elena's text. Reading it quickly, she felt a surge of anxiety for Maya, wishing she could be back at the center instead of standing here in a pressed shirt and blazer that felt increasingly uncomfortable in the Florida humidity. "And now," Hayes continued, "I'd like to introduce Jessica Chen from the Everglades Wildlife Rescue Center, who was personally involved in yesterday's dramatic rescue of a pregnant bobcat from the coils of a massive Burmese python." Forcing a professional smile, Jessica stepped forward to the microphone. She had prepared some brief remarks about the center's work, but seeing the expectant faces in the crowd, she decided to speak from the heart instead. "Thank you, Congressman Hayes. While I appreciate being here today, I have to be honest. Right now, back at our center, that same bobcat is in labor, possibly delivering premature kittens due to the trauma of the python attack. My colleagues are working to save both mother and babies as we speak." A murmur ran through the crowd, and Jessica saw several reporters lean forward with renewed interest. "This is the reality of our work," she continued. "Every day we face the consequences of the python invasion on our native wildlife. Yesterday it was Maya the bobcat. Last week it was an endangered wood stork. Before that, a family of marsh rabbits. The funding announced today isn't about politics or photo opportunities. It's about preventing scenes like the one I witnessed yesterday, where a magnificent native predator was nearly squeezed to death by an invasive species that should never have been in the Everglades in the first place." Hayes shifted uncomfortably beside her, clearly not expecting this candid departure from polite talking points. But Jessica wasn't finished. The python problem in the Everglades didn't happen overnight, and it won't be solved overnight. It began decades ago with irresponsible pet owners releasing snakes they could no longer care for, and with breeding facilities that lost containment during hurricanes. This is a human-created ecological disaster that requires human intervention to solve. She paused, suddenly aware that she might have gone too far off script. Glancing at her phone, she added, "I appreciate the Congressman's support for this crucial funding, and I know our entire team at the rescue center does as well. But if you'll excuse me, I need to get back to help with a bobcat in labor." With that, she stepped away from the microphone, nodding respectfully to Hayes before walking quickly toward the parking area, already dialing Elena's number as cameras followed her dramatic exit. Elena answered Jessica's call on the first ring. "Jess, what's happening?" "I'm on my way back," Jessica replied, the sound of car doors and traffic audible in the background. "How's Maya?" "Labor's definitely progressing. Marcus is preparing for delivery. How soon can you get here?" 20 minutes, maybe 15 if traffic cooperates." The engine roared to life. I may have caused a scene at the press conference. Despite the tension of the moment, Elena felt a flicker of amusement. "What did you do?" "Told the truth. Said Maya was in labor and that I needed to get back to help. Mentioned that the python problem was caused by irresponsible humans in the first place." Jessica paused. Hayes looked like he was going to burst a blood vessel. "Dr. Harrington's going to have her hands full with damage control," Elena said, though there was a hint of approval in her voice. "But we'll worry about that later. Just get here safely." Back in the recovery room, Maya's labor was intensifying. The bobcat had begun making a distinctive low yowling sound that experienced wildlife handlers recognized as associated with imminent birth. Marcus had assembled a small team of their most experienced staff, positioning them strategically around the enclosure. "We want to interfere as little as possible," he reminded them. "Maya's a first-time mother, but her instincts should guide her. We only step in if there's clear distress, or if a kitten appears to be in danger." Elena watched through the observation window, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands. Years of scientific training had taught her to maintain emotional distance, to observe and document rather than feel. But there was something about Maya, her fierce will to survive, her struggle to protect her unborn kittens against impossible odds, that had pierced Elena's professional armor. "First kitten crowning," Marcus announced quietly. Maya was positioned in a corner of the enclosure, partially obscured by the birthing box they'd provided, but still visible to the monitoring cameras. With remarkable composure for a wild animal in captivity, she began the process of delivering her first kitten. The tiny form emerged slowly, impossibly small, wet and vulnerable. Maya immediately began cleaning it with her rough tongue, the maternal behavior instinctive even in her weakened state. The team watched in tense silence as she stimulated the newborn, encouraging it to breathe. For a heart-stopping moment, the kitten lay motionless. Then, miraculously, it gave a tiny squirm and emitted a sound somewhere between a squeak and a hiss. "Respiration established," noted the technician monitoring the cameras. heart rate visible and appears steady. Elena released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. One safe, but how many more to come? Bobcats typically gave birth to 1 to 6 kittens per litter, with 2 to 4 being most common. Given Maya's condition and the premature birth, each delivery would be a separate battle for survival. The door to the observation room opened quietly as Jessica slipped in, slightly breathless from rushing. "Did I miss anything?" "First kitten just arrived," Elena whispered, making space for her at the window. "Seems stable so far." Jessica's eyes widened as she took in the scene. She's so calm, after everything she's been through. "Nature finds a way," Marcus said softly, never taking his eyes off the monitors. "Second kitten coming now." The next 30 minutes unfolded in a series of tense moments and small victories. A second kitten arrived, smaller than the first but similarly responsive once cleaned by its mother. The third birth proved more difficult, with Maya showing signs of distress as she struggled to deliver. "We may need to intervene," Marcus warned, preparing a sedative and birthing kit, "if she can't deliver naturally." But Maya rallied, summoning strength from some deep reserve. With a final push, the third kitten emerged, this one noticeably smaller than its siblings and initially unresponsive to Maya's licking. "Heartbeat present but weak," reported the technician. "No visible respiration." Marcus moved with quiet urgency. "I'm going in. Elena, Jessica, be ready to assist if she becomes aggressive." Entering an enclosure with a wild predator during birth was extraordinarily risky, but the alternative was losing the kitten. With practiced movements, Marcus approached the birthing box, speaking in low, soothing tones. Maya raised her head, a warning growl rumbling in her throat, her golden eyes fixed on Marcus with a mixture of fear and defensive aggression. "Easy, Maya," he murmured. "Just helping your little one." Whether through extraordinary intelligence or sheer exhaustion, Maya allowed Marcus to carefully extract the struggling kitten. He immediately began gentle respiratory stimulation, using a specialized suction bulb to clear the tiny airway and rubbing the kitten's chest with a warm cloth. For several agonizing seconds, nothing happened. Then the kitten gasped, its minuscule ribcage expanding as it drew its first breath. "There we go," Marcus said, his professional demeanor momentarily giving way to genuine relief. "That's it, little fighter." He carefully returned the revived kitten to the birthing box, placing it near Maya, but not directly in front of her, allowing her to approach and reclaim it on her terms. After a cautious sniff, she began cleaning it alongside its siblings. "Is that all of them?" Jessica asked. "I think," Elena began, but Maya's renewed restlessness indicated otherwise. "No, there's at least one more." The fourth and final kitten arrived 10 minutes later, its birth smoother than the third but still requiring careful monitoring. Once again, Maya demonstrated the remarkable adaptability of wildlife, tending to all 4 kittens with seemingly instinctive knowledge of their needs. 4 premature bobcat kittens, all currently stable, Marcus noted for the official record. Mother is attentive and demonstrating appropriate care behaviors. As the immediate crisis subsided, the team allowed themselves to exhale collectively. Maya had settled with her kittens in the birthing box, her body curled protectively around the tiny spotted forms that nursed weakly at her side. "They're so small," Jessica whispered. "Will they make it?" "The next 48 hours will be critical," Marcus replied. "But they've already beaten the odds just by surviving birth." Elena studied the family through the glass, emotion and scientific curiosity mingling in her gaze. 4 more bobcats for an ecosystem that desperately needs them. Even if they end up non-releasable, they'll be ambassadors for their species. "Speaking of ambassadors," Jessica said hesitantly, "Dr. Harrington called while I was driving back. The press is going wild with the story. My little impromptu speech seems to have touched a nerve." Elena raised an eyebrow. Good nerve or bad nerve? Both, apparently. The funding announcement is getting much more attention than Hayes anticipated. Dr. Harrington said social media is blowing up with Niger Save Maya hashtags and donations are pouring in. She paused. She also said Hayes is furious that I hijacked his press conference, but the public response has been so positive that he can't really complain publicly. Before Elena could respond, her phone buzzed with a news alert. She opened it to find a split-screen image. On one side, a still from their rescue video showing Maya in the python's grip. On the other, Jessica walking away from the press conference podium with Hayes looking stunned in the background. The headline read, "Wildlife Drama, Pregnant Bobcat Fights for Survival as Conservationists Battle Politics and Pythons." Well, Elena said dryly, so much for keeping a low profile. I'm sorry if I caused problems, Jessica began, but Elena shook her head. Don't be. Sometimes the public needs to see the unvarnished truth about conservation work. It's messy, it's emotional, and it's often at odds with political agendas. She nodded toward Maya and her kittens. But it's also this, fighting for every life, for the balance of an entire ecosystem. The next 48 hours unfolded in a blur of activity, with Maya and her kittens under constant monitoring. Elena and Jessica established a rotation with other staff members, ensuring someone was always observing the new family, while minimizing human presence to avoid stressing the mother bobcat. By morning of the second day, it was clear that while all 4 kittens had survived their first crucial night, the smallest one, the third born who had required Marcus's intervention, was struggling. Its nursing was weaker than its siblings, its tiny body often trembling with the effort of maintaining body temperature despite Maya's attentive grooming. We're calling him Spark, Jessica told Elena during their shift change, because he needs that spark to keep fighting. Elena raised an eyebrow. We're naming them now? You know that's the first step toward getting too attached. Too late, Jessica admitted with a small smile. The staff's already named all 4. The biggest one is Atlas, the second is Nova, little fighter here is Spark, and the last one is Echo. Elena sighed, but there was no real disapproval in it. Fine, but remember, if they recover, the goal is still release back to the wild. These aren't pets. I know, Jessica said, her expression sobering. But they're not just statistics either. Each one matters. It was an ongoing philosophical tension in wildlife conservation, balancing scientific objectivity with the undeniable emotional connection that developed when working closely with animals. Elena had always leaned toward the objective side, believing it allowed for clearer decision-making. Yet she couldn't deny that Maya's story had affected her more deeply than she cared to admit. The media attention continued to escalate throughout those critical days. Dr. Harrington fielded most of the requests, occasionally bringing reporters for carefully controlled glimpses of the recovery area, always from a distance that wouldn't disturb Maya. The center's social media accounts posted regular updates, carefully worded to balance scientific accuracy with the emotional narrative that had captured public imagination. Our patient continues to demonstrate remarkable maternal care despite her traumatic experience, read one update. All 4 premature kittens remain stable but in critical condition. The next several days will be decisive for their survival. The public response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, enough to fund a new recovery wing for the center and expand their python management research. Wildlife conservation organizations across the country reached out with offers of support and expertise. Schools requested virtual classroom visits to learn about bobcats and the python problem. Not all the attention was positive, however. On the morning of the 3rd day, Elena arrived to find Dr. Harrington in heated conversation with a representative from the Fish and Wildlife Commission. Absolutely out of the question, Dr. Harrington was saying, her normally composed demeanor showing rare signs of strain. The mother is still recovering from trauma, and the kittens are barely 72 hours old. Any transport would endanger their lives. The representative, a thin man with a perpetually furrowed brow, consulted his clipboard. Commissioner Davis feels that given the high-profile nature of this case and the significant public resources being allocated, the Bobcat family would receive better care at the state's main facility in Tallahassee. Elena stepped forward. "Excuse me, but that's simply not true. Our facility is specifically equipped for Bobcat rehabilitation. Maya is familiar with our team and environment. The stress of transport alone could cause her to reject or harm the kittens." "Dr. Vasquez, isn't it?" The man's tone was dismissive. "I understand your concern, but this isn't just about one bobcat anymore. This has become a symbol of our state's conservation efforts. The commissioner feels—" "The commissioner isn't a wildlife veterinarian," Elena interrupted, struggling to keep her voice level. "And with all due respect, I don't care what symbol Maya has become. My job is to ensure her survival and the survival of her kittens." Dr. Harrington placed a calming hand on Elena's arm. "What my colleague means is that our medical team's professional opinion is that moving the animals at this stage would create an unacceptable level of risk. Perhaps in a few weeks, once the kittens are stronger." "I'll convey your own concerns to the commissioner," the man said stiffly, "but I wouldn't consider this matter closed." After he left, Dr. Harrington let out a long breath. "Politics, always politics." "What's really going on?" Elena asked. "Why would they want to move them now, when it's clearly dangerous?" "Hayes," Dr. Harrington replied grimly. "After Jessica's speech and all the media attention, he's worried about looking like a peripheral figure in a story that's generating nationwide goodwill. If Maya and her kittens were at the state facility, he could position himself more centrally in the narrative." Elena felt a surge of anger. "These are living creatures, not political props." "To us, yes." Dr. Harrington's expression was resigned. "To men like Hayes, everything is a potential prop. But don't worry, I have no intention of allowing the transfer. We have medical authority in this situation, and I'm prepared to use it." When Elena entered the observation room, she found Jessica documenting the kitten's morning feeding with a mixture of scientific precision and obvious affection. "Atlas gained 6 grams overnight," she reported. "Nova and Echo about 4 each." "And Spark?" Elena asked, noting the hint of concern in Jessica's expression. "Only 2 grams. He's still nursing, but not as strongly as the others. Marcus is considering supplemental feeding if he doesn't improve by tomorrow." Elena studied the smallest kitten through the observation window. Even to her practiced eye, the difference was apparent. While his siblings had the plump, rounded appearance of healthy nursing kittens, Spark remained thinner, his movements less vigorous. "We knew this would be an uphill battle," Elena said gently. Jessica nodded, blinking back sudden tears. I want them all to make it, after everything Maya went through to protect them." "She's doing everything she can," Elena observed. "Look at how she's positioning him closer to her, making it easier for him to nurse." Indeed, Maya had arranged her kittens with noticeable care, keeping Spark tucked against her chest where he had the shortest distance to a nipple, while his stronger siblings had to reach farther. It was the kind of subtle maternal behavior that fascinated biologists, instinctive yet adaptive, responding to the specific needs of individual offspring. "Do you think she knows?" Jessica asked quietly. "That he's struggling more than the others?" "I think she knows he needs extra attention," Elena replied. Whether that's conscious awareness or instinctive response is hard to say, but she's definitely not giving up on him. As if hearing their conversation, Maya looked up at the observation window, her golden eyes seeming to meet Elena's with uncanny directness. There was something in that gaze, a wild intelligence, a determination that transcended species barriers. For a moment, Elena felt a connection with the Bobcat that went beyond researcher and subject, beyond rescuer and rescued. It was something more primal, a recognition between two female mammals both fighting in their own ways to protect the vulnerable. The moment was broken by the buzz of Elena's phone, a text from Marcus. "Need you in the conference room. Hayes is back with state officials." Elena strode toward the conference room, tension radiating through her body. In the few days since Maya's rescue, what should have been a straightforward wildlife rehabilitation case had spiraled into something far more complex, a nexus of politics, media attention, and competing interests, all swirling around one Bobcat and her vulnerable kittens. When she entered the room, she found an assembled group that confirmed her worst fears. Congressman Hayes sat at the head of the table, flanked by two aides. Beside him was Commissioner Davis from the State Wildlife Agency, a political appointee with limited field experience but considerable ambition. Dr. Harrington was already there, her posture rigid, but her expression carefully neutral. Marcus stood near the window, arms crossed defensively. "Dr. Vasquez, thank you for joining us." Hayes greeted her with practiced cordiality. "We were just discussing the transfer arrangements for the Bobcat family." Elena took a seat beside Dr. Harrington. "There will be no transfer," she said flatly. "As I'm sure Dr. Harrington has already explained, moving Maya and her kittens at this stage would pose an unacceptable medical risk." Commissioner Davis cleared his throat. "While we appreciate your concern, Dr. Vasquez, this case has become a matter of statewide interest. The governor himself has expressed a desire to see these animals receive the very best care our state can provide." "They are receiving the best care," Elena countered, struggling to keep her voice even. "Our facility specializes in Bobcat rehabilitation. We have the expertise, the equipment, and most importantly, we have established a relationship with Maya that minimizes her stress, critical for her continued recovery and her ability to care for her kittens." "No one questions your team's dedication," Hayes interjected smoothly. "But the State Wildlife Center has resources your facility simply cannot match: dedicated veterinary staff, advanced monitoring equipment." "With all due respect, Congressman," Marcus interrupted, "we have 3 wildlife veterinarians on staff, including myself, and our monitoring equipment is state-of-the-art. What's more, we have a decade of data on Bobcat rehabilitation success rates that exceeds the state facilities by nearly 30%. A tense silence followed this statement. Elena glanced at Marcus gratefully before turning back to Hayes. "Furthermore," she added, "one of the kittens is particularly vulnerable. Even a carefully managed transport could prove fatal for him." Commissioner Davis frowned. "Him? You've sexed and named the kittens already?" Dr. Harrington stepped in before Elena could respond. "We've conducted preliminary examinations and identified the kittens by sex for monitoring purposes. As for names, our staff uses identification markers to track individual animals. It's standard practice." It wasn't entirely true. The names had indeed emerged organically from the staff's emotional connection, but it was close enough to protocol to sound plausible. "The point remains," Elena continued, "that these animals are in a medically fragile state. Any unnecessary stress could have devastating consequences." Hayes leaned forward, his political smile fading. "Dr. Vasquez, let me be frank. This situation has generated significant public interest and, consequently, political attention. The governor sees an opportunity to highlight our state's commitment to conservation, particularly in light of the upcoming environmental summit." "So this is about using Maya as a mascot," Elena said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "This is about maximizing the positive impact of this situation," Hayes corrected. "The funding I've secured is just the beginning. With the right messaging, We could leverage this story into comprehensive legislation addressing the python problem. Isn't that what you want? It was a clever trap, appealing to Elena's dedication to the larger cause while glossing over the immediate threat to Maya and her kittens. Before she could formulate a response, the door opened and Jessica entered, her expression urgent. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said, "but Elena is needed in the recovery area immediately. It's Spark." Elena's heart sank. "Excuse me," she said, rising quickly. "We have a medical situation." "Dr. Vasquez," Hayes began, but Dr. Harrington cut him off. "Gentlemen, as you can see, we're in the midst of a critical rehabilitation case. Perhaps we should continue this discussion once the immediate medical concerns have been addressed." Without waiting for a response, Elena followed Jessica from the room, the tension in her colleague's shoulders telling her everything she needed to know. "What's happening?" she asked as they hurried down the corridor. "Spark stopped nursing about 20 minutes ago," Jessica replied, her voice tight. "He's showing signs of hypothermia despite Maya's efforts to warm him. Marcus left warming pads by the enclosure before he got called to the meeting." When they reached the recovery area, Elena's trained eye immediately spotted the problem. While Maya continued to nurse the other 3 kittens, little Spark lay slightly apart, his tiny body trembling despite his mother's attempts to pull him closer with gentle nudges of her nose. "His body temperature's dropping," Elena confirmed after checking the remote thermal imaging display. "We need to intervene." "Maya's been allowing us near the kittens for brief medical checks," Jessica said, "but removing one, she might reject him if we return him smelling of humans." Elena finished the thought. "But if we don't intervene, he won't survive the hour." It was the terrible calculus of wildlife rehabilitation, weighing the risks of human intervention against the certainty of death without it. Elena made her decision. "Prepare the incubator and formula. I'll try to take him quickly while you distract Maya with food." They moved with practiced efficiency, Jessica preparing a small amount of the rabbit meat that had become Maya's preferred food, while Elena readied a small transport incubator. The plan was simple but dangerous. Create a momentary distraction, extract Spark quickly, and hope that Maya's maternal instincts would allow her to accept him back after treatment. Jessica approached the enclosure first, speaking softly to Maya while displaying the food. The bobcat's attention shifted briefly, her nose twitching at the scent of meat. Elena used that moment to enter from the side, moving swiftly but calmly toward the kitten. Spark lay motionless now, his tiny chest barely rising with each breath. With gentle hands, Elena lifted the kitten, surprised by how little he weighed, a fragile life barely clinging to existence. She had him securely in her hands when Maya's attention snapped back, the mother bobcat immediately registering the threat to her offspring. The growl that emerged from Maya's throat was primal and unmistakable. She abandoned the food and her other kittens, rising to a defensive posture, eyes fixed on Elena and her stolen baby. "Easy, Maya," Elena murmured, slowly backing toward the exit. "We're trying to help him." Whether it was the familiar voice or some deeper understanding, Maya did not attack, though every line of her body suggested she wanted to. Instead, she followed Elena's retreat with intense focus, a low rumble continuing in her chest. Once outside the enclosure with Spark secured in the incubator, Elena let out a shaky breath. "Start the warming protocol and prepare the supplemental formula. I'll monitor his vitals." Jessica nodded, already adjusting the incubator settings. "What about Maya? She'll be distressed without him." "We'll keep him in her line of sight so she knows we haven't taken him away completely," Elena decided. "And we'll return him as soon as his temperature stabilizes." For the next hour, they worked to save the tiny life in their care. Spark's condition was more precarious than they had initially feared. Not just hypothermia, but signs of possible infection. His tiny body fighting battles on multiple fronts. They administered microdoses of antibiotics, carefully warmed him, and offered tiny amounts of specialized formula designed to supplement what little nutrition he'd been able to get from nursing. Throughout the treatment, Maya watched from her enclosure, her golden eyes never leaving the incubator where her kitten lay. Occasionally, she would move to check on her other 3 kittens, grooming them briefly before returning to her vigil at the edge of the enclosure closest to Spark. "I've never seen anything like this," Jessica whispered as she prepared another dose of antibiotics. "It's almost like she understands what we're doing." Elena nodded, monitoring Spark's vital signs with intense focus. Some wildlife rehabilitators believe that animals can sense intention, that they know when humans are trying to help rather than harm. "Do you believe that?" Elena hesitated, her scientific training warring with what she was witnessing. "I believe Maya is showing remarkable adaptive behavior for a wild predator. Whether that's understanding or simply tolerance born of exhaustion is difficult to say." Spark's condition improved gradually. His temperature stabilized, his breathing became more regular, and he even managed to swallow a few drops of the supplemental formula. Still, he remained dangerously weak. "We need to make a decision," Elena said after 2 hours of intensive care. "His temperature is normal now, but he needs continuous feeding to survive. If we return him to Maya, he might not have the strength to nurse effectively." "But if we don't return him, she might reject him later," Jessica countered, "or worse, become distressed and neglect the other kittens." It was a classic rehabilitation dilemma, balancing medical intervention against natural processes. Elena studied Maya through the glass, noting how the Bobcat continued to divide her attention between her 3 healthy kittens and the 4th under human care. "Let's try something," she decided. "We'll return Spark, but stay close to monitor. If he fails to nurse or Maya fails to care for him, we'll intervene again." Returning the kitten proved to be less challenging than removing him had been. Maya seemed almost eager, meeting them at the edge of the enclosure as Elena carefully placed Spark back in the nesting box. The mother Bobcat immediately began grooming her returned kitten, her rough tongue stimulating his circulation as effectively as any human medical technique. "Look at that," Jessica said softly. "She's positioning him at her most productive nipple, the one the other kittens prefer." It was true. Maya had nudged Spark toward a specific nursing position, gently keeping the stronger kittens away until the weakened one had latched on successfully. It was sophisticated maternal behavior that demonstrated both instinct and adaptation. "We'll stay and monitor for the next hour," Elena said. "If he maintains nursing, we might be in the clear for now." As they watched the Bobcat family, the door to the recovery area opened quietly. Dr. Harrington entered, her expression grave. "How's the kitten?" she asked. "Stabilized for now," Elena replied. "Maya is nursing him. We're cautiously optimistic." Dr. Harrington nodded, but her furrowed brow suggested her mind was elsewhere. "That's good. Unfortunately, we have another situation developing. Hayes and Davis didn't take our medical emergency very well. They're claiming we're using the kitten's condition as a delaying tactic." "That's absurd," Jessica protested. "Spark nearly died." "I know that, and you know that," Dr. Harrington said wearily. "But they've escalated. Davis is talking about invoking emergency powers under the state wildlife code to assume custody of Maya and her kittens." Elena felt a cold anger settling in her chest. "They can't do that. We have medical authority in an active rehabilitation case. It's a gray area legally. They're arguing that the extraordinary public interest creates special circumstances." Dr. Harrington ran a hand through her silver hair. "I've called our legal team, but I'm worried they might show up with a transfer order before we can mount a proper challenge." "So what do we do?" Jessica asked, her voice small. Dr. Harrington's expression hardened with determination. "We buy time, document everything, Every vital sign, every feeding, every maternal behavior. Build an irrefutable medical case for why moving these animals would endanger their lives. And if that's not enough, Elena pressed. Then we prepare for civil disobedience, Dr. Harrington replied, the steel in her voice surprising both younger women. I didn't spend 40 years in wildlife conservation to watch politicians use endangered animals as props. The three women shared a moment of silent solidarity before Dr. Harrington continued more practically. I've contacted some colleagues in the media, legitimate science journalists who understand conservation issues. If Hayes wants to make this public, we'll make sure the public gets the whole story, not just his political spin. As Dr. Harrington left to make more calls, Elena and Jessica returned to their monitoring. Spark had nursed successfully for 15 minutes, longer than he had managed in the previous 24 hours. Though still concerning, his condition appeared to be improving under his mother's care. Do you think they'll really try to take them by force? Jessica asked, her voice barely audible. I don't know, Elena admitted. Politics makes people do desperate things, especially when their public image is at stake. Well, they'll have to go through us first, Jessica declared with unexpected fierceness. Elena smiled despite the tension. Careful, Jess. Your activist side is showing. Is that a bad thing? Not at all. Conservation needs both science and passion. Elena's smile faded as she checked her phone. The media's already picking up on the conflict. Let Maya stay is trending on social media. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the hallway, raised voices, hurried footsteps. The door burst open, revealing Marcus, his expression a mixture of anger and urgency. They're here, he said tersely. Davis brought transport crates and 3 officers from the Wildlife Commission. They have some kind of emergency custody order. Elena felt her heart rate spike. Where are they now? Dr. Harrington intercepted them in the lobby. She's demanding to see the paperwork, questioning its validity, buying us time. Marcus glanced at Maya and her kittens. How's Spark? Stable but fragile, Jessica replied. A transport would kill him, Marcus. I'm certain of it. He nodded grimly. That's what I told them. They didn't seem to care. The unfairness of it all hit Elena with physical force. After everything Maya had endured, the python attack, premature labor, the struggle to keep her kittens alive, to now face separation because of human politics, seemed like a cruel joke. Lock the recovery room doors, she decided abruptly. No one enters without proper medical authorization. Jessica, call every wildlife veterinarian you know. We need expert testimonials about the dangers of moving newborn bobcats, especially ones with medical complications. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're barricading yourselves in? We're following medical protocols for critically endangered patients, Elena corrected. If they want to physically remove us from protecting our patients, they'll have to do it on camera. As if summoned by her words, the center's security system pinged with an alert. News vans were pulling into the parking lot. Word of the confrontation had leaked, drawing media attention like moths to flame. Looks like this is about to get very public, Marcus observed. Elena turned back to Maya, who was watching the humans with alert wariness, sensing the tension in their voices and movements. The bobcat had pulled all 4 of her kittens closer, including Spark, as if preparing to defend them. Good, Elena said, her resolve hardening. Let the public see exactly what's happening here. Let them see what putting politics before wildlife conservation really looks like. As Marcus left to help Dr. Harrington stall the officials, Elena and Jessica exchanged a look of determination. They had dedicated their careers to protecting wildlife like Maya, not just from natural threats like pythons, but from the often more dangerous human systems that treated wild animals as commodities rather than living beings deserving of respect and protection. Outside the recovery room, they could hear the approaching confrontation. Official voices demanding access, Dr. Harrington's firm refusals, the murmur of gathering media. The next few hours would determine not just Maya's fate, but potentially set precedents for wildlife rehabilitation across the state. The standoff lasted through the afternoon and into the evening. Outside the recovery room, voices rose and fell as Dr. Harrington continued to challenge the legality of the emergency custody order. Inside, Elena and Jessica maintained their vigil over Maya and her kittens, documenting every vital sign, every nursing session, every maternal interaction, building their case one observation at a time. Sparks nursing consistently now, Jessica noted, the relief evident in her voice. His body temperature has stabilized. Elena nodded, updating their detailed log. Still weaker than the others, but fighting. Maya's keeping him in the prime nursing position. Their phones buzzed constantly with updates from colleagues. The confrontation had exploded across social media, with wildlife conservation groups, veterinary associations, and concerned citizens rallying to their cause. Video footage of state officials with transport crates attempting to enter a wildlife rehabilitation facility had triggered outrage among environmentalists and animal lovers alike. Near sunset, a new commotion outside the door drew their attention. This time, the voices included one they hadn't heard before, female, authoritative, cutting through the arguments with crisp precision. Completely inappropriate application of emergency powers. Commissioner Davis, you've overstepped your authority, and I've just issued a judicial stay pending proper review. The recovery room door opened to reveal Dr. Harrington, accompanied by a stern-looking woman in a tailored suit. Behind them, Commissioner Davis appeared distinctly uncomfortable. Elena, Jessica, Dr. Harrington said, unable to suppress a small smile of triumph. This is Judge Mariana Cortez from the State Environmental Court. She'd like to see our patients. Judge Cortez nodded briskly. I've reviewed the preliminary medical documentation and granted a temporary injunction against the transfer order. Now, I'd like to see these animals for myself. Elena led the judge to the observation window, explaining Maya's condition, the premature birth, and Spark's ongoing medical challenges. Judge Cortez listened intently, asking pointed questions about rehabilitation protocols and survival probabilities. And in your professional opinion, she asked finally, what would be the likely outcome of transporting these animals to the state facility at this time? Extremely high risk of mortality for the smallest kitten, Elena answered without hesitation. Significant stress to the mother, potentially resulting in rejection of the litter. Even the healthier kittens would face increased risk of complications. The judge studied Maya through the glass, watching as the Bobcat adjusted her position to better accommodate her nursing kittens. Fascinating creatures, she murmured. So resilient, yet so vulnerable. Turning back to the group, her expression hardened. Commissioner Davis, I'm extending the injunction indefinitely. These animals will remain under the care of the Everglades Wildlife Rescue Center until such time as the medical team determines they're stable enough for potential relocation, if that's deemed necessary at all. Davis began to protest, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. This is not a political matter, Commissioner. It's a matter of animal welfare and proper application of wildlife rehabilitation protocols. I suggest you inform Congressman Hayes that his press opportunity will need to be rescheduled. After they departed, Dr. Harrington explained what had transpired while Elena and Jessica were barricaded with Maya. The media attention worked in our favor, she said. When footage of wildlife officers with transport crates hit the news, Judge Cortez reached out. She's been a strong advocate for evidence-based conservation policy for years. Once she reviewed our documentation and saw the state's flimsy justification for emergency removal, she issued the stay immediately. And Hayes? Elena asked. Last seen making a hasty exit from the parking lot, Dr. Harrington replied with undisguised satisfaction. Apparently being seen forcing vulnerable baby animals from medical care wasn't the photo opportunity he was hoping for. That night, Elena and Jessica took turns monitoring Maya and her kittens. With the immediate threat of removal gone, they could focus fully on their patient's care. Spark continued to improve, nursing more vigorously and beginning to show the same rounded belly as his siblings. "We did it," Jessica said softly as she watched the Bobcat family sleeping peacefully in the early morning light. "We actually stood up to a congressman and won." "We stood up for what was right," Elena corrected. "Maya did the rest." In the weeks that followed, Maya's story transformed from political football to conservation success story. The media narrative shifted from conflict to collaboration as the center provided regular updates on the Bobcat family's progress. Spark, once on the edge of survival, grew stronger daily. By the time the kittens were 4 weeks old, even an experienced observer would have struggled to identify him as the runt of the litter. The python that had nearly ended Maya's life became an educational ambassador, part of a traveling exhibit about invasive species impacts. Rather than being euthanized, it was used to train detection dogs that would help locate pythons in the wild, a program funded, ironically, by Hayes's original appropriation. 6 months later, Elena stood at the edge of a remote section of the Everglades, a transport crate secured in the airboat beside her. Jessica and Dr. Harrington flanked her, their expressions a mixture of pride and the inevitable sadness that accompanied successful releases. "Are you ready?" Dr. Harrington asked. Elena nodded, checking the tracking collar one final time. Maya had worn it for the past month, acclimating to its presence before returning to the wild. It would provide valuable data on her movements and hunting patterns, adding to their understanding of how bobcats navigated python-infested territories. The kittens had been released 2 weeks earlier in the same area, a controversial decision that had sparked debate among wildlife biologists. Conventional wisdom suggested releasing them separately to prevent competition, but Maya had shown such extraordinary maternal dedication that the team had opted for a different approach: release the nearly grown kittens first, allowing them to establish territories, then release Maya in the same region. "The GPS shows they're all still in the area," Jessica noted, checking the tablet that displayed data from the kittens' tracking tags. "Spark's been the most adventurous, actually. He's covered more ground than his siblings." "The fighters often are," Dr. Harrington observed. "They have more to prove." Elena approached the crate, kneeling to peer through the grating at the bobcat inside. Maya looked back at her with those same intelligent golden eyes, no longer weakened by injury or the burden of pregnancy, but strong, alert, and unmistakably wild. "Time to go home," Elena said softly. They positioned the crate facing the dense underbrush, then retreated to a safe distance before remotely opening the door. For several long moments, Maya remained inside, assessing her surroundings with characteristic caution. Then, with fluid grace, she emerged into the dappled sunlight, her spotted coat blending instantly with the shadows of the forest floor. At the threshold between captivity and freedom, she paused, looking back at the humans who had saved her life, nursed her kittens, and protected them from both natural and political predators. For a heartbeat, her gaze met Elena's across the clearing, wild animal to human, predator to scientist, mother to protector. Then Maya was gone, disappearing into the undergrowth with soundless efficiency, reclaiming her place in the ecosystem that had nearly lost her. "Do you think she'll find them?" Jessica asked, wiping away a tear. "Her kittens?" "I think she already knows exactly where they are," Elena replied. "She's probably been aware of their location since we arrived." As they prepared to leave, Elena's phone chimed with a news alert. The Florida legislature had just passed the Comprehensive Everglades Protection Act, which included unprecedented funding for python management and native species conservation. The bill, originally championed by Hayes as a political vehicle, had evolved into substantive legislation after extensive input from scientists and conservationists, including Elena herself, who had testified before the Environmental Committee. Sometimes it seemed even political opportunism could be channeled into positive outcomes. 1 year later, Elena stood on a viewing platform at the edge of a sawgrass prairie, binoculars trained on a tawny form moving through the tall grass. Maya's tracking collar had fallen off months ago as designed, but Elena would recognize her distinctive movement patterns anywhere. "Got something?" Marcus asked, joining her with his own binoculars. "Maya," Elena confirmed, "and she's not alone." Following her line of sight, Marcus focused his binoculars. "Well, I'll be damned. Is that—" "A new litter," Elena nodded, unable to keep the smile from her voice. "At least 3 kittens, maybe 4. They watched in reverent silence as the bobcat led her new offspring through the grass, teaching them the ways of survival in this challenging landscape. Against all odds, pythons, premature birth, political interference, Maya had not just survived but thrived, contributing new generations to an ecosystem fighting for balance. As the bobcat family disappeared into the distance, Elena thought about the long, complex path that had brought them to this moment. One rescue, one mother's determination, one team's refusal to give up. Small actions in the grand scheme of conservation, perhaps, but multiplied across countless dedicated individuals, such actions formed the foundation of hope for wild places and wild creatures everywhere. In the eternal dance between human impact and natural resilience, Maya's story represented something precious, a moment when the balance tipped ever so slightly toward healing.